Hi, I am Sabra Boyd, and this is Pitching and Publishing. We're going to go over how to pitch and publish op-eds, essays, and articles. So a little about me, I am an investigative journalist and a child trafficking survivor. I co-wrote the Survivor Storytelling Workbook with Chris Ash and the National Survivor Network. And the reason that I became a journalist, I didn't go to journalism school, but I kind of came into this profession because I didn't like the way that our stories were being told. And yeah, so that's how I'm here today. So just to start out, get out a piece of paper or a new Google Doc or Word doc or whatever you prefer to type with, and write down your writing goals, both short term and then make another column for long term goals. Just take a few minutes to do that. And short-term goals can look a number of ways. It can be something like I want to develop a routine where I write every morning or every evening, or maybe it's that you want to write a certain number of hours a week. Um, and let's see, long-term goals can look something like, oh, I want to have a show where I'm a host and I'm interviewing interesting people, something like that. Or maybe you want a book deal or something like that. So whatever those look like to you, write down your short-term goals and your long-term goals. Okay, and you can come back to this one after we finish later on. So write down your top dream byline. So your top 5 publications that you would like to be published in. So and really shoot for the stars, because I've coached students whose first byline was in the New York Times or Ms. Magazine. Trying to think of where else. I think, yeah. Oh, and also Vice. And I think I had another student whose first byline was in Slate. So you don't have to be thinking about like local papers or smaller publications. Really, like, what would your top 5 be? Because this is really just what we're dreaming. And the worst that they can do is say no. And a big part of being a writer is dealing with rejection. So yeah, if the New York Times is top of your list, that is totally fine. So think about what you're an expert in. So, I'm doing this training for trafficking survivors. So I'm assuming that all of you already know what you want to write about and already know what you want to share with the world in terms of your expertise. But write down, 3 things that you always want to talk about so much that your family and friends are like, I don't want to hear anything else about it. I don't want to hear about, like, the top 5 causes of homelessness or some whatever it is that you're constantly talking about. Those are things that you probably should be writing about and sharing with the rest of the world. So go ahead and choose one of your favorite ideas and summarize it in 2 sentences as an elevator pitch. So you probably know this, but just in case, an elevator pitch is when, if you were in the elevator with like Oprah or Anna Winter from Vogue, and you had 15 floors to tell them your really great idea for an article, you want it to be really short and focused and get them very excited, right? So try to take your favorite idea that you want to write about and shorten it into just 2 sentences. So the reason that we do this exercise is because when you're pitching, it's a lot easier to distill your idea into 2 sentences and then expand out from that than it is to start with just this very long, rambling description and trying to pare it down. So starting with those 2 sentences and expanding from there is a much better strategy. So go ahead and look at your list of ideas that you had earlier. What categories could your piece specifically fit into? The one that the idea that you're most excited about. So for example, I published a climate change story last summer. It was about a bike race and climate change. And I pitched it to travel sections. I pitched it to, to like climate change and science columns. And I pitched so many places and I thought it was never going to get picked up. And then I finally pitched the sports section at the New York Times and they took it and it ended up being like a really, really great collaboration. I could not have asked for a better editor. Yeah, so, a story that might be about um, human trafficking and the supply chain. That could potentially fit into like the fashion column of a publication, or it could also fit into business, politics, economics, beauty, culture, travel, tech. Like actually, that story could fit into so many different columns. So be thinking strategically because also with like a climate change story, there's obviously like a lot of competition to get your story published with the climate change column or the science column or environmental weather or whatever. But by pitching to the sports section, there was a lot less competition there. They're obviously getting more pitches, not about climate change. So thinking in terms of thinking like that is a lot more strategic as well. So these are a few, so I use a spreadsheet. You don't have to use a spreadsheet, but I use a spreadsheet to track my pitches and ideas. So I'll go ahead and show you mine. So I have one tab here for just ideas. So I might be out to lunch with some friends and suddenly get a really good idea for something I want to write about. So I'll just jot that idea down. And this is basically a list of self-generated prompts so that when I get home and I have time to actually focus on writing, I can just hit the ground running. And then I also have this tab for research where I might like put a link that I want to read later. And then the pitch tracker is really important. However you want to do this, you do need to track where you've sent pitches and when you've sent follow-ups, things like that. And then you also want to, save editors' contact information here because, or you can also have a separate tab for that like I have here. Yeah, so you want to have editors' contact information so that you don't have to go sleuthing to try to find it again in case they delete it, because sometimes editors will put out a call for pitches on Twitter or something like that, and then they'll delete it because they get inundated with so many pitches. Yeah, so that's a good idea to do it that way. And then Rose Eveleth is a really amazing science writer who also has a public template for her pitch tracking and stuff like that. So that's what hers looks like. It's a little bit different. And if you want to try using Rose's or mine, you could just go to File, Make a Copy, and it'll save a copy of it to your own Google Drive so that you can go ahead and change the columns around however you want to. So it's important to keep in mind that this is not the last thing you'll ever write. And your pitch needs to be just enough information to get in the door and start the conversation. It's a lot better to get a maybe than an outright no. Because in my experience, you're never going to change a no to a yes. But also be thinking in terms of, every no that you get is building a rapport with that editor. And, you might be disappointed that they say no, but when you pitch them again 2 months later with a different story, they're going to recognize your name and you're building a relationship with them each time they say no, even though it hurts. So as a freelancer, your biggest, most powerful tool is being able to write in scene, because you're not a staff writer who's like reporting on the traffic or the weather or the court saying this happened and then, and then, and then. That's not your job as a freelancer. Your job is to do features or really, articles and essays that are really emotive. And your biggest, most powerful tool, like I said, is writing in scene. And in scene means that it's cinematic, it transports the reader there, it's very visceral, just a lot of, there's a saying called the universal is in the details. So You want to be as detailed as possible so that you can really bring the reader there. These are a few examples of writing in scene. You don't have to make your pitch in scene if you don't want to, but it can be a really powerful way to get an editor's attention. Let's see. I'll just show you this one really fast. This is Don't Break the Peel by Noah Cho. I really love this essay as an example of writing in scene. So I'll just read the first couple of paragraphs. It's called Don't Break the Peel. Have you ever gazed in wonder at a long, unbroken strand of fruit peel spiraling away from the blade of a paring knife? Have you watched as the thumb of your Halmoni, your Emo, your Uma seems to magically glide along, applying just the right amount of pressure to the peel, with that sharp knife just under the surface? I never understood how she did it so effortlessly. She'd take a Korean pear, a bay, enormous in size, with its sandpapery peel and a promisingly sweet and floral scent underneath, and peel the whole thing as I watched, entranced. Her hands were so small, the fruit so large, and it didn't matter. It always peeled the same way in her hands. The peel would unwind, slowly, methodically, separating from the fruit, but never breaking itself. A tiny spark, a minuscule amount of juice, might release into the air while her blade broke the membranes of the fruit. Sometimes I'd think, this is it. This is where it breaks, but it never did. So I really like that as an example of in scene because, you know, Noah Cho is just focusing so intricately on his grandmother's hands, the scent, the you can just feel yourself there, even if you don't have a Korean grandmother, even if you've never specifically eaten a pear, I'm sure that you've eaten like a different fruit, and you can relate to having someone, care for you or caring for a child and like making them a snack. So, like I said, the universal is in the details, even if you don't have a Korean grandmother who prepared, pears for you. Um, so we're gonna do a couple of prompts just for fun. So let's see. So go ahead and write down just like a longer pitch than from the elevator pitch, like maybe a few more sentences about where that story is going to go. And try to add as many details as possible so that you're really writing in scene and transporting the reader there. So an important thing to ask yourself is this a story or a topic? You don't want to pitch just a topic. You want there to be a story there. And the way that you can tell that is asking yourself, is there a character that leads us through the narrative and shows us all the details and how they're connected? So in a personal essay, that character is probably you. In an article or an essay, it could be, it doesn't have to be a person necessarily, or it could be multiple people. I wrote one essay in which the narrator was this building in a neighborhood, and it kind of had this omnipotent perspective of everything that was going on in the neighborhood because it was a very tall building. So it can be more abstract than just like a person leading us through the story and showing us those details. But you do want it to be a story with a narrative leading us through. So another way to know if it's a story is asking yourself, what are the stakes? Like what is going to get the reader excited about this? What is the climax of the story? What is the conflict that we're trying to resolve by the end of the story? And why should the reader care? That's a question that you need to ask yourself. Is it a human-centered story? So if it's a story about climate change, um, some people might find that really interesting, but you're going to have to incorporate human elements and the impact it has on human lives. for most people to really resonate with it. You also want to ask yourself, who's the character leading us through? Like I said, if it's a personal essay, that character is likely you. It's also helpful to think about what the transformation is. So sometimes I'll put this at the very top, like in the header of my document as I'm typing. So from blank to blank. So if it's a story about human trafficking, it might be from captivity to freedom or something like that. And you do want to try to introduce these things in the first paragraph in less than 150 words. You don't have to, but that's a really powerful way to do it. You also want to think about your author bio. So think about every piece you publish as a calling card and an opportunity for future opportunities and things like that. You can change your bio to tailor it to whichever publication you're writing for. And for example, I have 5 bio templates. So I'm going to show you a couple of example bios. Oh wait, that's the wrong link, sorry. So I really like these Hugo House bios as an example. Hugo House is a place where I teach writing classes sometimes. So Beverly Ahrens is a writer and game developer. She works across disciplines as a copywriter, journalist, novelist, playwright, screenwriter, and short story writer. She explores futuristic worlds in fiction, but also enjoys discovering the stories of modern day unsung heroes. So as you can see here, Beverly is doing a lot of really cool things, but she also said here that she's a writer and game developer. So this to me says that, if an editor or an agent, like a book agent, were to read something that she's written and sees this bio, they might say, oh, I want to reach out to Beverly and see if she can send me like a book proposal or something. Or maybe a game development company would be really excited about something that she's written. So a director at the game development company is going to, or a video game company is going to reach out to her and ask her to help write the plot for their next game. So be thinking about like how you want to introduce yourself to your audience, and you can use, a bio like my bio for Vice might be more irreverent and playful than my bio for the New York Times, which is going to be a little more straight-laced, if that makes sense. Let's see. So seasons of publishing and timing your pitches. August is a really bad time to pitch, so try not to pitch in like July and August because that's when most editors go on vacation. September is a really good month to pitch because that's when everyone's back in the office, and September is a really big month for publishing. It's kind of like the biggest month in publishing, I'd argue. January is also a good time to be pitching because that's, just like any company, that's when they have their new budget for the entire year. Whereas in like November, December, they're probably going to have smaller budgets and be less likely to take on new freelancers. So I'm also going to show you this media kit. So media kits are something that you can Google. Sometimes it's harder to find for some publications, but Food and Wine, they make theirs really available. It's geared more toward advertisers, but it can be helpful for you as a writer as well. So yeah, I just Googled media kit and, oh, here, their editorial calendar. That's what you're going to look for. So you usually want to pitch about 6 months in advance, because especially for magazines, because magazines are going to print, they're going to know their layout like 6 months in advance. So yeah, you'll want to pitch them 6, maybe even 8 months before. So if you're pitching them a story that has something to do with like New Year's Eve, that means that you'd be pitching them like in June. So let's see. Okay, so for December, January issue, the ad close date, this means that advertisers would need to figure the layout with them by September. So I guess their lead time is only like 3 to 4 months. So that's actually a lot easier than 6 months, but it can't hurt to pitch them earlier. And then let's see, yeah, June. the ad closes in March. So it looks like their lead time is about 3 to 4 months. Yeah, so anyway, Googling editorial calendar or media kit for a specific publication, it can be really helpful sometimes. And it also tells you what the themes are going to be. So let's see, for June's issue, it looks like that's their summer issue. Longer days call for weekend road trips, outdoor adventures, and sipping chilled wine. Celebrate summer with our annual issue and make the most of that farmers market bounty. So this tells me that they're specifically looking for pitches about farmers markets, weekend trips, road trips, outdoor adventures. Like if you have obviously this is for a food publication, but yeah, these media kits can be really helpful, even though they're geared more toward advertisers. And let's see. So how much should I write before I pitch? I usually recommend personally having like half of it finished, especially if it's a piece that's more kind of traumatic and emotional. Like I want to give myself that buffer to be able to feel like I don't have to write the entire thing in 3 days, because some publications will have a really quick turnaround. Like you might have an editor that says, yes, I love this pitch. Can you get me a draft in 3 days? And if you're writing about like the most traumatic thing that's ever happened to you, you're going to lose all your hair. And I'm all for everyone not losing all their hair. So your draft doesn't have to be finished, but I personally like to have at least half of it written so that I, feel like I can hit the ground running. But you don't want to tell editors that. Editors want to feel like they have a hand in shaping it. So the way I phrase my pitch is something like, I'm working on a piece about dot, 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 so that I'm not telling them like, oh, it's finished. Because the way most editors will read that is, oh, you're giving me this finished draft and saying take it or leave it without any of my input. I think that's really stupid, but a lot of editors really like to feel like they have a hand in shaping it and will bristle at you sending them a finished pitch or a finished draft. It's a little bit different when you pitch an op-ed. Op-eds do have, like most op-eds will need to be fully finished when you pitch it, but and fiction is also like that. But everything else, like editors will not want to hear that you finished the draft, even if you have. Let's see, what else should I say about this? Service essays. Service essays are pretty cool because it's kind of like you researching advice on how to do something well. So like a good service essay might be how to fly safely without getting COVID, or how to, let's see, how to shop for the best deals on summer shoes, or I don't know, something like that. Service essays are kind of like advice, or what listicles used to be. Listicles aren't really a thing anymore. They're not very popular anymore, but think of service essays as a listicle that's like fully written out. So remember that essays, really anything you write, is all about choosing what to expand and what to collapse, because when you spend an entire paragraph describing like the flavor of this, blueberry dessert, you're telling the reader, you really need to know about this blueberry dessert. It's very central to the story. If the blueberry dessert is just one of many desserts in this dinner party that you're writing about or something, then you only need to mention it in just one sentence. But when you spend an entire paragraph on this one thing, you're telling readers that you need to know a lot about this to understand the story. So 800 to 1200 words is a good target for your draft in terms of essays and articles and things like that. Most op-eds are around 800 words, but for personal essays, for articles, editors are likely to ask for like a word count of around 1,000 to 2,000. So if you're shooting for a draft that's like 1,200 words, it's really easy to delete a paragraph or two and get down to that 1,000 word count, or to add a couple paragraphs to get up to that 2,000 word count. So 1,200 is really what I try to focus on when I'm working on a draft before I have, gotten it placed with a pitch. So like I mentioned, op-eds are one of the few exceptions where editors will want you to submit a fully finished draft. But even when you're pitching an op-ed, you want to avoid pitching to the slush pile. The slush pile is something like, submissions at thenewyorker.com or something, like just to a nameless like inbox that's probably monitored by an intern. And yeah, not to hate on interns or anything, but they might be in college, they might not really know what they're doing, they might not know why your story would be really important. So you want to try to vet which editors you're pitching to so that you're not wasting your time with just getting lost in the slush pile. So we're going to talk about pitch structure a bit. So the body of your pitch, you want it to be 100 to 2 or 150 to 200 words that explains what this is about, why you, why now, and why this editor. You don't have to explicitly say those things, but you want to make sure that it's obvious that you've done your research. You don't want to pitch a story about human trafficking to the local like events editor or something, unless there is some sort of fundraiser or art project or something like that. You just want to make it obvious that you've done your research. Like if you're writing about a movie, you're reviewing a movie about trafficking, you'd want to be pitching to the entertainment or the film critic editor. And then what this is about, why should the audience care? You can jump into it in scene if you want, or you can explain, I'm working on a piece about, and then just name it that way. So these things don't have to be like explicitly spelled out, but you do want to touch on all of this. And then the why now. So when I say evergreen, I mean that it's going to be as relevant today as it is a year from now. Or is it following the news cycle? Is there something in the news that makes this a really relevant story right now? And just be thinking about that because that's going to affect your strategy for pitching. So at the very end, you'll want to include a summary of your bylines and clips and say something like, thank you for considering. My most recent work can be found at, and then you have a hyperlink to these other publications. If you don't have any bylines, that's okay. You can self-publish things on Medium and Substack and then link to that instead. There's a benefit to both. So I always self-published both on Medium and Substack, but just know that because Medium has better SEO generally, but Substack has kind of a more polished perception. So I usually link to Substack if I'm going to self-publish and link here. Let's see. Trying to think if I'm forgetting anything else. I know this is a lot of information. I'm sorry. If you do self-publish to Medium or Substack, just know that that is something that you cannot pitch to an editor at a publication because you are selling them the exclusive rights to that story. Yeah. And then in your signature, make sure to include a link to your website and newsletter if you can. So how long should my pitch be? Try to keep it to under 250 words total. The reason for that is if you put yourself in the editor's shoes, they might be running out to lunch to just grab like a sad salad that they're going to eat at their desk. You want your pitch to try to fit into the screen of their phone as they're standing in line for their very depressing salad. And you don't want it to be a huge, overwhelming wall of text. That's why I try to keep it to under 250 words. You want it to just be enough information to get them excited and interested and ask more questions. Because like I said, a maybe is a much better answer than an outright no. You're never going to turn a no to a yes, but you might turn a maybe to a yes. And you want to give them just enough information that they're excited about the idea, they're excited about your pitch, and they want to know more. Let's see. So pitch examples. So this is an in-scene pitch example for the story I mentioned earlier about climate change and the bike race. So here I jump into it straight in scene, Wildfire at her heels, Sarah pedaled her bike faster. She needed to cross the river before the fire reached the bridge or her. So as you can see, that's a really exciting opening. It's in scene. It's like transporting the reader there to the excitement. This is another example. This one is not mine. This is by someone named Brian Barr. In St. John's, Newfoundland, a provincial fishing town roughly midway between Montreal and Greenland, the mermen began to appear in the summer of 2017. Sunning themselves on rocks by the harbor were the graffiti-strewn pylons of an abandoned waterfront factory. They caused quite a stir. One merman even ventured into a local tavern where he was spotted splayed out on the bar smoking a long cigarette. Soon a photo shoot was organized and the Merby calendar, By is Newfoundland speak for dude, was born. So this is another pitch that I wrote. This one is kind of a hybrid, I would say. So, hi Amanda, 100 years ago during the 1918 pandemic, ordering groceries for pickup was the norm. Around the same time, the first self-service indoor shop opened where customers roamed aisles with carts. Today, ordering groceries remotely has again become the norm during the COVID pandemic. So how do I find the right editor and their contact information? So look back at your list of the top 5 publications that you wanted to write for and see if they might be a good fit for this pitch. And then put them in, descending order. So starting with your number 1 choice, and then identify which sections of the publication your pitch might fit. So beauty, wellness, business, culture, entertainment, tech. Obviously, with a larger publication, you're going to have more different sections, more editors for those sections. And then you want to find the editor for that section. So let's see, I would recommend not pitching associate or assistant, or sorry, I would recommend not pitching executive editors because usually they're in more managerial roles. So you do want to pitch associates, assistants, audience editors, because they're more focused on finding quote unquote new voices. And they are actually doing the work of editing writers. And then in terms of finding editors' contact information, so the masthead is one place to look. The masthead is where they kind of list everyone's names, although sometimes it's like only the executive editors. So I also recommend using a Twitter search. So one example, I have a photo down here. So the New York Times Well editor. So Well was like a column about different wellness and health and trends and things like that. So New York Times Well editor, and then you toggle over to people, or the New York Times editor and toggle over to people. And then they'll show you everybody that has those words in their bio. Let's see. And when all else fails, I use rocketreach.co, and it gives you 5 free searches a month. So I use an old or a fake email to register so it doesn't archive my email. Muckrack.com is also a good place to search. So I'm going to demonstrate for you. Let's see. I'm trying to think of an example. So Michelle Garcia is an editor that I worked with who's really wonderful. So this is her personal website. You don't want to pitch people at their personal email address. I don't think she has her work email there, if I remember correctly. But I'm going to look her up on Rocket Reach, and I don't know if I'm logged in. Oh yeah, so I have my fake email here. So I'm going to view Michelle's email. Oh, it's not letting me log in. Okay, well, anyway, it's not letting me log in, but Rocket Reach does give you 5 free lookups a month. I think I have to verify it again with them. Um, okay, anyway. And then muckrack.com. So if you wanted to potentially write for Michelle, this is how you vet editors to make sure that they're a good fit. So this shows you everything that Michelle has written in the last several years. So 2 months ago, she wrote about this NFL wide receiver. She's also written about political issues in Florida. So yeah, if there are any red flags, like just move on to the next editor, but you do want to do this to make sure that there's someone that you want to work with because you're entrusting them with your story. So how to make Twitter work for you. So the mute and block buttons are free to use. Um, I do feel like maybe I shouldn't even include this slide anymore because of everything that's happened with Twitter in the last year. But I do find it to be a helpful resource still to like find editors and to vet them and to see if there's anything in their social media that is like a red flag potentially. Um, let's see. So your pitching decision tree, this can be helpful for thinking about which publications you want to pitch to. So if you're so ask, is your story related to the current news cycle? Then if that answer is yes, then you want to ask yourself, is it so timely that it needs to be published within a few weeks? If the answer to that is yes, then you want to pitch to newspapers, online publications, things like that, because the turnaround is going to be a lot faster. Just think in terms of like newspapers. This is going to sound obvious, but newspapers publish every single day usually. Online publications are publishing like constantly throughout the day. So their turnaround and their need for news stories is a lot faster. And then if the answer is that it'll be relevant in 6 months, then you might consider pitching to magazines, a feature column for a newspaper section, online features, things that are going to take a little bit longer. Or if the answer is that it's pretty evergreen, meaning that it's going to be just as relevant today as it is 6 months from now, then you can pitch to your options are much wider. Newspapers, online publications, magazines, literary magazines, if it's kind of a more experimental, kind of out there format. So pitching strategies, you want to schedule your emails to go out on Tuesday or Wednesday mornings if possible, and you want to try to discern like what time zone the editor is in. So if they're on the East Coast and you're on the West Coast, you want to schedule that email to go out, 6 a.m. West Coast time, 9 a.m. East Coast time. And then you also want to consider upcoming holidays, anniversaries, things like that. You might also consider including a personalized note about the editor's work or something that you appreciate, so that they know why you're pitching them and that you've done your research. I mean, don't make it so obvious that it just sounds like you're kissing up, but like if there is genuinely like an article that they've written that you really enjoyed, like, say that. There's no harm in that. Try to avoid pitching to slush piles if possible. And then timing. Just know that if your pitch is accepted today, it probably won't be printed until about 8 months from now if it's for a magazine. And yeah, just keep that in mind, that timing. So following up and staggering your pitches. So keep in mind that a pitch acceptance rate of 15% is considered really good. So don't get discouraged. Like try not to get discouraged until you've gotten like a dozen rejections. And then at that point, you might want to consider tabling it and coming back to it later, because the news cycle, it constantly is turning and returning. So it's probably going to be relevant again like a year from now. Something else will happen that'll make it relevant most likely. Use a spreadsheet to track your pitches, assignments, and payment status. Some people pitch just once a month. Some people pitch 5 to 8 different pieces a week. You want to be prepared for getting a yes to all of those pieces all at the same time, like, 5 different stories, which is a nightmare, by the way. There are some weeks where I will pitch like 5 different pitches and get no for every single one of them. And then one time I got a yes to 5 different pitches all at the same time. And it was really, really difficult to get all of those assignments finished at the same time. So yeah, just be thinking about that. There is a possibility that you'll get a yes to all of them. And when I say pitches, I mean like 5 different pitches. You don't want to pitch simultaneously the very same story, because if one editor says yes and another editor says yes within an hour of each other, you risk burning one of those bridges. And the publishing industry might seem really intimidating, but it is a really small world, and you want to avoid burning bridges if possible. So usually I follow up with an editor 10 to 14 business days later, depending on the timeliness. If it's, something that is really urgent, I might follow up sooner. But, following up like 10 days later with something like, I wanted to check back to see if you were interested in my pitch before I reach out to another editor. Thanks so much. And then hopefully you'll hear back. If you don't hear anything back after that follow-up email within a few days, then kind of the unspoken rule is that you're free to then pitch another editor that same story. And if the first editor comes back to you, they're going to understand if you say like, oh, I already got it accepted somewhere else. Sorry about that. Yeah, they should be understanding of that. Let's see. You want to stagger your pitches so you don't fall into a scenario where 2 editors say yes. And then I recommend using a different email for your pitches, a Gmail account preferably, because most editors use Google Docs for editing. So if you have a different email, then it's less likely to get lost in your inbox, along with like coupons for whatever you've signed up for. Yeah. And you would still want it to be something professional though. So I think mine is sabra.words@gmail. So that's the email I use specifically for pitches. Let's see. So summary of key points for pitching. You want your pitch to be 12 to 15 sentences or less than 250 words ideally. You want to know who you're pitching. You want to find the right editor and the right publication. You also want to check, have they run a similar story recently? So you can use Google or the publication's own archive. You also want to think about a list of different angles and potential sections. So like we talked about earlier, there's a specific story that might fit for both the travel section and the fashion section. You can pitch both of those sections. And there might be less competition in one of them, depending on the story. You can also reverse engineer your list of publications that you want to write for. So, say you want to write for, I'm trying to think of an example, maybe like Out Magazine or something, and just like look through some of their issues, and is there a gap in their coverage that, are you seeing something like maybe they don't have enough political stories, maybe they don't have enough like stories about, outdoor activities or adventure, something like that. And then I usually have the best of luck with pitch emails that go out on Tuesday or Wednesday morning, like I said earlier. So these are just some tools for time and project management that I like. I really like Trello. I also use Google Pinpoints and Otter for transcription. I've been talking for so long. Let's see. There will be trolls. So don't read the comment section. The comment section is never for you. The comment section is for advertisers. it's for the publication to say, oh, look at all this engagement we've gotten, so that they can get more money. We also can't talk about publishing without talking about safety for writers. So here are a few different safety tools that you can use. Delete Me is one that I really stand by. It's been really helpful for me and other writers who've been doxxed. It basically, I think it costs about $10 a month, but it's really worth it if you can afford that. And Delete Me goes through and basically scrapes your information from the internet. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me. And the other issue, or the other aspect that I should cover, is a subject line for your pitch. So you want your subject line to look something, let's see. So you want your subject line to look something like this, where it's pitch hyphen and then, just a very like snappy headline. So if you think about what you want the headline to be for your story, that's a good subject line. And it can be really helpful to look back at your elevator pitch to find a really snappy subject line that's going to make the editor even want to open your email, because that's really the first hurdle, getting the editor to open your email at all. So an example of pitches that I've had success with was what cadavers taught me about life, or pitch Zoom dysmorphia and COVID. If this is a really urgent piece, you can put in brackets timely in front of pitch or something, so that they know that they should open it today. But yeah, that is kind of the overview of how to pitch. And again, like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. Um, I'm really passionate about helping survivors get published, because our voices need to be heard. And so often, reporters and editors don't know what they're doing when they report on trafficking issues. So thank you so much.